So welcome back to episode 2 of the Ultimate Home Lab mini-series. In episode 1, we built the Home Lab ground up, which we named the mini mainframe. You may have remembered towards the end of episode 1, I actually had installed Docker via the kind of pre-install method. So during Ubuntu server install, we could kind of go down the list and then select some packages to install, even though we chose to install the minimal version of Ubuntu server. Well, turns out that caused a bit of a permissions issue later on with certain things. So we've uninstalled the snap version of Docker, which was installed because of that pre-install option. And we're going to do all this basically from scratch. In today's episode, we're going to be installing Docker. We're also going to be installing Dockge, which is an alternative to Portainer. It's totally optional. You don't have to follow along with every single thing in this video. This is kind of a guide and maybe to give you some ideas of things you can do. We're also going to be looking at installing the Uncomplicated Firewall, which is your bog standard firewall for Linux. Installing Nginx Proxy Manager, Fail2ban, and Nextcloud. So quite a beefy episode for episode 2, but I'm titling this episode Deploy, Defend, and Expose. One of the other cool things about this episode is that we're also going to be looking at internal-only domains. So making things accessible without port forwarding. So internal only. Still behind SSL encryption, still with your domain names, but using some custom DNS rules and things like that. And I'm going to teach you how to get into that in this episode. The reason why I fitted in a few of these things into this episode is because, one, they all go quite well together. They show a really cool way of how to expose these things, but at the same time defend them. And I've had a few requests and comments over various videos saying, "Oh, can you do a new video on this, or can you show us this on Ubuntu versus Windows?" So yeah, this is going to be kind of an all-in-one video for a few different things. So yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is SSH into my mini mainframe. To do that, I'm going to go with SSH kltech, which is the username, at the mini mainframe. Now, that is on my network pointing to my test environment, the mainframe we built in the last episode. But you could obviously switch out the mini mainframe for whatever IP you're using, and obviously whatever username you're using. But we're going to go for that. So SSH from our Windows PowerShell here, because I'm on my laptop, my Razor Blade. So we're going to go in here, type the password in, and that gets us into the system. And again, this is pretty damn minimal. There's very minimal amount of applications installed on this. As it says right there, this system has been minimized by removing packages and content that are not required. And that's basically just during the install process where I've chose to install the minimum amount of things. Now, some of you might already be using servers that you've already built. You've already got your home lab together, and that's absolutely fine. Again, this is one of those guideline videos where you just follow along in the areas that you want to. And alternatively, you can actually skip ahead in this video. So if there are some parts of this video that you want to have a look at, such as Nextcloud, skip ahead to Nextcloud. There's no problem in doing that, but just watch out, because obviously some cool tips might be in the middle, such as the local domains and running things locally versus exposing them and things like that. So stick around if you can, and we'll go from there. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we really should do on a new system like this is start to basically lock it down a bit. And with regards to that, we should have at least a basic firewall. With the Uncomplicated Firewall, if you're running an Ubuntu server or Linux in general, this is a tool you'll definitely want in your arsenal. But what is the Uncomplicated Firewall? Well, it's UFW, and it stands for Uncomplicated Firewall. It's a user-friendly interface to manage your server's firewall, making it easy to control what traffic is allowed in and out. Think of it like a gatekeeper at your server's entrance, carefully screening who gets access and who doesn't. UFW provides a layer of protection against unauthorized access, potential attacks, and unwanted traffic. So why use it? Well, simplicity. The Uncomplicated Firewall is designed to be straightforward, even for those new to server administration. By controlling incoming and outgoing traffic, you reduce the risk of your server being compromised. You can easily configure UFW to allow or deny specific types of traffic, tailoring it to your server needs. So we're going to be installing this on our mini mainframe and continuing our series on that. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, please jump over to that now. I'll leave a link in the description. And that's basically on us building the server up. And in this episode, we'll be touching base with the Uncomplicated Firewall and how we install it. So we're going to start off by doing the update and upgrade commands. And we'll do upgrade. And then we'll do install Uncomplicated Firewall. Now, after installing the Uncomplicated Firewall, and all links will be in the description below, the same as commands, by default, it's not running. And we can actually put a command in here to show us the details. We do sudo uncomplicated firewall status verbose. We can see that it is inactive. But we want to create a rule right here at the beginning simply because we don't want to lock ourselves out, and we are SSHing into this from my Windows computer, so we definitely want to make sure we have a rule in place for that. And basically, we could just put in sudo uncomplicated firewall allow SSH, but we want to make it more specific. So I'm putting this command in here, which basically I'm going to create a few of them. I want to allow myself to access the SSH port from various IP addresses on my network. So the first one is actually to my VLAN 6 network, which is on 192.168.6.1. It's in the range of 24. So we're going to allow that. I'm also going to allow... And I'm also going to allow this from my WireGuard. Do sudo uncomplicated firewall enable. Let's hope this works. Okay, there we go. So that seems to be fine. So to see the rules, we have to actually enable them. It seems a bit dumb since we want to make sure the rules we've typed in actually work. But it is showing as working fine. So the 3 rules that we have enabled on the system at this time are allowing entry to port 22, which is the SSH port that I have this running on. The action is allow in, and then from the various subnets on the system, the IP ranges. Now we should be able to, yeah, there we go. So if we run sudo uncomplicated firewall status verbose, we can see the status is active, logging is on. Default rule is deny incoming, allow outgoing, and deny routed, and then new profiles we've skipped. So that's looking really good actually. So if we just clear this screen up and then run that command again, that looks a bit better. So I'm happy with that, and that's basically how we do it. And you can allow any rules that you see fit. Just be sure that you take time to understand the rules you're creating before you create them. So just to go over that one more time, to get any rule in that we want, we literally go into sudo uncomplicated firewall, and then we can either do allow or deny, followed by the rule. Now at this point we could type it in from an IP address, or we could just put a port number in. So we could do sudo uncomplicated firewall allow 443. And then the rule is added. If we go to status, we will see that we've now got it in as 443. And it even adds in the IPv6 rule as well for us automatically, which is great. But say we wanted to delete a rule. Well, all we've got to do is prefix the rules that we set originally. So if we go back into here, and we do uncomplicated, and we do delete allow 443, we'll find that they've now deleted. And that's all you've got to do is put the delete before the actual rule that you created, and it shows it's gone again. So I hope that's given you a quick overview of the uncomplicated firewall and how to set that up on your Linux system, and some basic commands to allow you to use that. The next thing that we want to install is Docker itself. So to install Docker, we've done the update, so we're just going to run these following commands now to get the official Docker repository. So sudo apt-get install ca certificates curl, installing the keyrings, downloading, keyrings, setting permissions for them. To install the latest version of Docker after doing that, we're just going to run this command. Again, all commands will be in the description below. And if we do sudo docker flag version, there we go. We're running the latest version of Docker, which is 27.3.1 at the time of this video. So we've installed the Uncomplicated Firewall and we've installed Docker. Now we're going to install Dockge. Yeah, which will be this command here. What this command is going to do, it's going to be running a Docker run command. It's going to be restart unless stopped. We're going to be exposing on port 5001. Now, just something to be aware of when it comes to Docker, although we are running the Uncomplicated Firewall, Docker will punch holes through the firewall whenever you expose a port. So it automatically does it for you. But the caveat is it won't show this in the list of Uncomplicated Firewall rules as we create them. So bear that in mind. It will literally just add an IP table rule, which is basically the back end of your system, what accepts or drops connections to and from your server. Docker literally takes kind of control of that aspect for its containerization platform while on your system. So any ports you expose in a composed file will be exposed through the firewall regardless. So 5001 is the port we're going to be using. That's the standard Docker SOC path, which allows Dockge to run and can create and manage all your stacks. And then it's basically saying, where do you want to install this to? Now, on my system, what I've done is I've created a directory, and you can create the directory first if you'd like. Which if I do ls, and you'll see I've got Docker there. So I'm in the home directory as it were. So if I do change directory /home /kltech, this is the directory that I'm in right now. And that's where we are. So you've got Docker, downloads, and snap. So I've already created a directory called Docker. If you need to do that, you do make directory, mkdir, Docker, you tap enter, that would create that. You could then change directory into Docker. And in there, then, we've already got a Dockge package available, but I'm going to remove that because we are starting from scratch. If I do sudo, you don't have to do this method now. Sudo remove, go. So yeah. So as I was saying, 5001, Docker socket, and where are we going to install this? That tilde, that's the pronunciation for that, by the way. I always called it a tilde. I have no idea why. But that tilde, that little command there, which is on your keyboard, it should be next to the enter key. Or the hashtag key or the pound key, whatever you want to call it, next to the @ symbol. That key there is the tilde on a UK standard keyboard anyway. So you put that in. So that represents home, the home directory, which is /home /kltech. Obviously, it'll be / whatever your user is. And then I've got to go into the Docker folder, not Docker folder, into Dockge. And then what I like to do with my apps is kind of mimic the right-hand side of the colon there, because the difference there is on the left-hand side is whatever you want to create. On the right-hand side, it's how it's viewed inside the container. And generally speaking, we should never change those things on the right-hand side of the colon unless you know exactly what you're doing. So, for example, that /app /data, you would not change. That would stay like that. But you can change the left. I like to mimic part of the path on the right. So when I get it into my project folder, for example, this is Dockge. And it could be Nextcloud, it could be anything. I like to mimic the inside path. So I've got app data, where app data is here. That's a volume. We're doing another volume here. Again, got the tilde, so it's the home directory, /docker, Dockge. And again, we've got opt stacks inside the container on the right of the colon there, opt stacks. I like to mimic that. And then we've got an environment variable here, which is Dockge stacks directory opt stacks, which is basically where if you wanted to, you could change where inside the container it looks for the compose file stacks that you're deploying. We're using the Lewis Lamb Dockge image, and we're going for latest. Reading on the GitHub repository, there's been some controversy about using the latest tag. I don't think the developer quite recommends it. I think he prefers you to kind of use just the one. So like instead of latest, put the number 1 there, which will give you the latest version of the first build. Personally, I always recommend using the latest. I think developers should be using the nightly tag if they're going to be doing a lot of development like that in that area. But that's just personal opinion. We're going to go with latest. You can go with 1 or latest, entirely up to you. If we run into problems later on, well, hell, we can backtrack on it. But otherwise, this is where we're going to go with it. Enter. Oh, it looks like we need to start Docker. Docker has clearly not started. Okay, so to get this running, we're going to do sudo systemctl start Docker. That gets that going. And then we're also going to do sudo systemctl enable Docker, which means it'll start on boot. And now we should be able to run our Dockge run command. There we go. So it'll download Dockge for us and install. And that's installed. So if we do sudo docker ps, we can see that that's now installed with its own randomly assigned name, funny carver. We could obviously specify the container name if you wanted to, but I really do. So as I was saying, that is now installed. Okay, so the Uncomplicated Firewall is now active. It's got the 2 SSH rules. We've installed Dockge. We've installed Docker. So we've covered those areas. Next thing I want to do now is actually connect to our instance of Dockge to make sure that that is running correctly. So we're going to get this up here. We're going to go to 192.24, I believe, is the IP address of the machine. IP address. Yeah, 624. If you find out the IP address of your system by actually using this command, IP address, if it's saying that you need to install it, because if you're following me from scratch, you might not have got that package already installed. You would literally just run the command sudo apt install iproot2. That gives us access to the IP address command. Okay, so there we go. So what we need to do now is go to our web browser. We need to go to 192.168.624. Obviously, this you're going to have to change it for whatever you're on, :5001. That gets us into our Dockge install that we just installed on Docker. Now, if I go back, and we do go back to the Uncomplicated Firewall status numbered, you will notice that there is no explicit allow rule coming in for port 5001. And this was what I was talking about earlier on. Docker punches a hole through the system. It actually looks at the IP tables to create that connection. So I put in sudo IP tables -l, and then we look on the where it says chain everywhere. We're looking for chain Docker. There it is, chain Docker. You will see that there's got an accept from anywhere to the container IP address for Dockge on port 5001. So it's punched a hole, despite not being in the Uncomplicated Firewall authorized lists. It's actually punched itself a hole in the IP tables, which again is the kind of the back end system here that either accepts or rejects those connections or drops those connections. So just be something to be wary about. Anytime you're punching a hole in Docker Compose by exposing ports, you will be punching them straight through the firewall. So basically create yourself a username and password, whatever you want to do, and then create. And now we're in. This is basically how we can really easily manage our Docker installation on our server. It's like I said, it's like an alternative to Portainer. It's a bit more stripped down, a bit more streamlined. You can't really control certain things like just specific volumes or networks, but you can control full composed files. The next thing that we want to install on our journey is Nginx Proxy Manager. Now, whenever you click the Compose button in here, it's going to always default to an Nginx Compose. We're not going to use that, so we're going to do Control-Alt-Delete because we don't need it. At this point, what we need to do is I'm going to, like I say, put everything you need is going to be in the description below this video. So if you're thinking, where are these commands? Where do I get these commands? They're all in the description below. So I'm going to pop on here this Compose file, which is Nginx Proxy Manager. And you can go around this a few ways, right? So some people prefer to have both port 80 and 443 open because you can have an automatic HTTP to HTTPS redirect. I don't. And the reason I don't is because I only want port 443 open when it comes to exposing this through my firewall. And I'm using the firewall of Gold SE. Why? Because you further lock down your system. It's less of an attack surface. The area for attack is minimized by keeping port 80 closed. And essentially, as long as people that you're giving access to any of your domains that come into the system, type in the https://. I mean, most people these days, you're just sending them links, aren't you? The links are just being sent, you're just clicking on them. So you're not really having to type in that https://. But even for that little bit of work, I personally find it still more secure to have only one port open on the system coming through, or minimize the amount of ports coming through where possible. So going down this compose file, we see that we can actually take out version. We're not using version anymore. That's no longer required when it comes to Docker. So in services, we've got app, and we've got JC21's Nginx proxy manager using the latest image. Restart always, ports being exposed and not 8080. That's why the hashtag is there. That comments that out. 81 is going to be the administration interface. This is where you can get access to and control what domains, what SSL certificates are coming through here. The whole admin setup is through 81. And then you've got port 443, which is where all the HTTPS traffic is going to come through. Now, you can obviously chuck this on network mode host if you want to. I haven't found a reason to do so because it seems to work perfectly fine on Ubuntu server without that. And we actually get a bit more protection because it's remaining, the networking side has remained inside the container as well. We're not exposing that purely to the host network either. And then volume wise, it's going to require 2 volumes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this at the beginning to home kltech, which is my directory. Inside there, we're going to put /Docker, because that's the folder that we're putting all our projects in. You can do whatever you do. You do whatever suits you best. Then we've got Nginx Proxy Manager, npm, and then, as always, I mirror the inside of the container there past the colon with our data folder. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to replace the bottom one. Kflix is my primary server. Yep, so we should have home, kltech, docker, and npm, and I'm going to mirror the container side there, etc. Let's encrypt. It's not on any particular network, but we can put this in a network. And we're going to put this in a network because I'm going to show you how to really lock the system down. So what I'm going to do here is this. So what we've done here is we've defined an internal network called npm. And that's going to come back to help us in a little bit when we're exposing other containers to make this really, really secure. Now, I've removed port 80 from here because we just don't need it at this point. But yeah, we're going to go with that. So networks npm, and we're going to put stack name npm, just short for Nginx proxy manager. At this point, we can just go ahead and click deploy. And we see the second part of the service I like, which is a visual representation of everything being downloaded. And then you'll also get a terminal down here as well, which we can work with. Notice that we didn't need to put an accompanying database with the latest version of Nginx Proxy Manager is built in. Although you could if you wanted to. And then the other cool thing is we get an immediate terminal down the bottom here, which we can see everything whirling around and spitting up and getting ready. Now at this point, all we've got to do is either open a new tab here and go to the IP address of the system, :81, or we can just click 81, which is right here on the container. Again, just to push that forwards in your mind there, if I do a sudo uncomplicated firewall status numbered, again, port 81 has not been punched through on the firewall here. It's not on the allow list, but it is being put through on the IP tables, and that's why we can access it through here. Now, the default password and username for this is, address is going to be admin@example.com, and the default password is going to be change me. When we log in with those details, it's going to ask us to change those things around. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a username of this. And then we're going to change the password from change me to one that I've randomly created in my Vault Warden. And that's another cool project we'll be doing a bit later on. I do have a video right now for it. on my YouTube channel, so feel free to check out that one. But we'll definitely be adding that to the mini mainframe at some point. And save, and then we're good to go. And then this is Nginx Proxy Manager. This is our reverse proxy, and it's going to help us reverse proxy our traffic through the system. Okay, so with Nginx Proxy Manager set up and installed, essentially what we want to do at this point is now acquire an SSL certificate. So you're kind of going to need a domain name. Now, that can be a free domain name that you've already got one or whatever you want, but we are going to need to create one. Now, I use dynu.com for my domain name and management and things like that. I'm a member of this service. You will see that it's not pointed at any IP address here. And essentially what I want to do is two domains on this SSL certificate. So I'm going to want to have an asterisk, which then allows all subdomains to be covered. So asterisk.kltechservices.dynu.net. And then I'm also going to want one for the root domain, which is just kltechservices.dynu.net. So I've got both of them on the same SSL. Now, bearing in mind, again, we've got no ports forwarded. So when I do test the server reachability, you're going to see that that can't happen. That's not going to work because the ports are not forwarded. But it doesn't mean we can't use it. So we're going to use a DNS challenge. And all that means is that we're going to basically, instead of testing the server's authority and ownership via a direct connection, we're going to tell through an API DYNU to put a text record on the domain. And then Let's Encrypt is going to verify that exists, proving that we indeed own that domain and therefore give us an SSL certificate for it. So if I go to DYNU on the list of providers, in here, API credentials, scroll down, you can either generate a new key or use an existing one. In where it says your DYNU auth token, highlight that all. Watch out, there is a space between the equals and the API key. And then we're going to scroll down to agree to the terms. We're not going to mess around with the propagation settings. And then we're just going to click save. And it's going to attempt to acquire those SSLs. If I go into DNS records, by the way, you will see that the ACME challenge has already been put on my domain very quickly. And it's going to be looking for this text record for Let's Encrypt. So in a few seconds' time, this should all go green and we should get our SSL certificate. Okay, and after the first error, I just literally clicked do it again, and it worked the second time. So just bear in mind that if that does happen to you, you get that error message. Just try it again after a few seconds, give it a bit of time. So this SSL certificate now has our wildcard, our asterisk.kltechservices.dynu.net, and the root domain kltechservices.dynu.net. We only need them in the one SSL certificate there. So with the SSL certificate acquired and ready to go, and obviously this one's going to be used for our internal only domain. We've not exposed the 443 port on the root of firewall. It's only exposed in the system, the mini mainframe. We're going to put Dockge behind Nginx Proxy Manager at this point in time and show you how we can do that. So essentially what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to add a proxy host. We're going to want to pop in a domain name, DOCKGE for Dockge, dot, not that, dot kltechservices.dynu.net. Now it's going to be HTTP because it doesn't have its own SSL right now, but we're going to put one on here with this domain. Then the host name is going to be the IP address of the system, which we know to be 192.168.624. Now the port is going to be 5001, and we're going to block common exploits and WebSockets. Well, we enable WebSocket support and block common exploits. Now, at this point, this is where it gets really interesting, because as we know, we comfortably can access port 5001 with the IP address there. That works fine. But something is going to change when we enable this due to the way the Nginx proxy manager works. And we also have to make a little adjustment before we go full blast ahead with it too, DNS-wise, because this is going to be an internal domain only. So if we go to the SSL tab first, we'll use the SSL certificate that we created earlier on, and we'll force that option there. The proxy host is set up and is online. However, if we click on it, it's not going to work yet. We'll go round and round and round until it comes back and says, I can't find this web page. I can't find this server or app. The reason for that is twofold. One, if we go back to our domain on DYNU, there is no IP address set here. Why? Well, it's going to be an internal domain, so we don't need to announce where this actually is on the internet. But the other problem is that we haven't set up the custom DNS routing for this. Now, this is where it's going to get a bit sticky for some of you. You need something like a router that allows you to put in your own custom DNS routing names, or something like AdGuard or Pi-hole where you can reroute domain names using like DNS rewrites. The way I do that is with my Firewall Gold SE, although I used to do it on AdGuard. All I do on my Firewall Gold SE, and this is pretty much the equivalent what you're going to do on your router, assuming your router supports this function, is scroll down until you get to, in my case, it's going to be services. I'm using DNS over HTTPS for all my devices. Some DNS rule is basically going to be kltechservices.dynu.net. Okay? What that does is, instead of the system sending those DNS requests out to the internet, it's going to say, don't bother going out there. You're not going to find the web page accessible out there. Reroute to this IP address. Now, I've already got that set up. So you're going to say, well, Keith, it's still not working. Why is that? And this is the second part of the conundrum. Because of the way Nginx Proxy Manager works, we do, in fact, need to put a rule in the uncomplicated firewall for the services that we want to proxy. For example, if we go back to clear this, we're going to do sudo uncomplicated firewall allow port 5001 passwords in. It adds both rules for IPv6 and IPv4. So sudo uncomplicated firewall state as numbered. You'll now see that I'm allowing port 5001 from anywhere to come in. And now if we refresh the page with the DNS rerouting and the authorized firewall, you'll see that Dockge is now coming in on our internal domain name. Bearing in mind, I do not have port 443 forwarded on the firewall itself, on the router. There is a distinction. There are two firewalls we're dealing with here. One on our system, the mini mainframe, and one on the router. So it's important to clarify which one I'm talking about. I'm talking about the router. We are not port forwarding 443 on the router. So I'll also show you something. If I do ns lookup and we do the online version versus the command version, if I go for dockge dockge.kltechservices.dynu.net, it doesn't find that IP address anywhere online. It cannot reach that. It doesn't have that information. That's great, because we want it to be that way. So essentially, if I show you kind of some sort of on-screen diagram here of what this is to make it easier to kind of view, you've got the request being sent to your router, your custom DNS solution, rerouting back to the mini mainframe or whatever home lab system you've got running, and then Nginx Proxy Manager proxying that through the system, reverse proxying it to the IP address and port number using the Let's Encrypt certificate, which we have. So we have successfully set up an internal domain. And the great thing about this is that we can now use this for all projects going forward. So if you don't share your projects with anyone, if you don't have any friends and you don't have any family using this apart from you, you never have to expose these services anymore. And if we set up something like WireGuard or some sort of VPN to connect back to the home server as well, you can actually access these services over your VPN, like I do right now, without ever exposing it to anyone. And I'm also going to show you how we can get Nextcloud set up on this. So the next thing we're going to set up is going to be Nextcloud. And again, we're going to do that internally first and show you there. The other thing I'm going to do just before we do that is actually show you how to do access lists. So on Nginx Proxy Manager, if we go to access lists, this is where we can kind of create authorizations. So if we just go with a name internal only, you can put a username and password behind this as well if you really want to. That's another way of locking this down. But right now we're just going to go over to access. By default, it denies all, but we are going to put in our subnets and IP ranges. So if we do 192.168.60.24, like we did earlier on for the SSH. And if we also put in our WireGuard IP, which we need to get up, which is there. So what is that? 10.226. 10.226.0.24. So what it's saying is basically this internal access list is only going to allow people to connect to the domain, even on the internal only, which means not everyone on my network is going to be able to reach this either. For example, my guest VLAN won't be able to connect to this, even if I allowed the routing across with the Nginx access list. This prevents that from happening. So we're going to do 10.226.0.24, that's my WireGuard, and 192.168.6.0.24 for there as well. And if we go back to hosts, we edit our Dockge domain to internal only. Now, we should still be able to access this, which is great. However, if you are attempting to access this from any other device on the network outside of those two IP ranges, maybe you've got a guest network or something that you don't have locked down via VLAN or something like that, because by default on the firewall or Gold SE, VLANs actually are not immediately blocking everything. So you could put things in different VLANs, but on firewall, they don't automatically just block everything. You have to put specific rules into place for that. So if you hadn't actually got a block rule on there, they might still be able to connect to your Dockge instance. Now they can't, because we have locked this down again. There we go. So we have an internal only access domain, internal only. You can't get much better than that, but there are a few tidbits that we can go into. What we're going to do next is set up Nextcloud all in one. And the reason we're going to do that next is because it does use quite a fair amount of ports on the platform. You start off with the master container, and then that starts building more containers after that. I think you can get up to maybe 8 or 9 containers. I think maybe a few more. But I say let's do that now. So in the next part of this video, what we're going to be doing is actually installing Nextcloud all-in-one, and all links and commands will be in the description below for the compose file for everything we've been doing so far. Now, remember, we are running this on the internal domain only. No ports have been forwarded on the router. So let's work our way through the Nextcloud all-in-one compose file. So we're using Nextcloud all-in-one latest. Restart always. Container name is going to be Nextcloud all-in-one master container. The volumes are going to be Nextcloud all-in-one master container. We've got the Docker sock running in here. We're not exposing port 80 or 8443 simply because we are running this on the reverse proxy Nginx Proxy Manager. We're going to expose the admin interface on port 8383. By default, that is 8080. And inside the container, it's 8080. And just to give you the separates there, everything on the left of the colon you can change, everything on the right just leave as is, because that's what's inside the container versus your host computer. I'm using port 8383 simply because there might be containers that we use in the future that might use 8080. It's not essential to use this on that, so we're doing it for that reason. The next thing we're going to be doing is we could put Nextcloud data directory on a different drive. So we on the mini mainframe we have a 500 gig NVMe drive, but if we have multiple drives or we had a big 16 terabyte or something like that, or maybe you have a hard drive you want to have all the data for Nextcloud running through, then basically you would put that in here. And the way you would do that is you would first create a volume. First, you would create, if you wanted, now, if you don't want to change where Nextcloud is installed and you want to use the boot drive that you're installing on, like I am, you don't need to do this step. This is only for people who want to change the drive from where it is before we install it. You would do Docker volume create. It would be a local driver. And essentially what you would do is inside the quote marks here, you would delete this. And you would put in here wherever on your system that hard drive was mounted, probably something like mount and then the drive name, wherever you've mounted that drive to. Or it might be device SDA1. And then the path on that drive where that would be, such as Nextcloud. That is with what the device is. It's the directory where you want to mount that folder or drive that you're going to be installing Nextcloud to. Once you're happy with that, you would then hit the enter button, and then that would create that drive. It has to be Nextcloud underscore all-in-one underscore Nextcloud underscore data directory. And then that needs to match up here in the environmental variable. You would put that in there. So you would change that then to said name for the volume. For example, it would be that. We're not going to do that, so I'm going to comment that out. But if you wanted to do that, you could. Nextcloud also has Borg backup built in to do regular backups. The same process with that. If you want it to be somewhere other than the boot drive, maybe you have a dedicated backup drive or a folder that you put that into. Same thing for that. So you would then use volume create Nextcloud all-in-one backup directory. And again, where I've got a path there set already, you would change that to wherever you wanted it to be in here, whatever location that Docker volume is going to go to. So again, it could be something like home, KL Tech, Borg backup. You get what I'm trying to say there? Or you could, like, again, you could go to device SDA1, or you could go to a mounted drive. For example, my SanDisk 4 terabyte drive, and create the Nextcloud all-in-one backup directory. Now, you don't actually have to specify the backup directory in the compose file, because that can be used. That'll be set up later on. But you would create the volumes first if you wanted to change those locations of those things before we run the master container, before we deploy this compose file. Just so you're aware. I have a video on Nextcloud all-in-one. Although it is based on Windows, the configuration alone is worth viewing. So I'll leave the description, the link in the description for that one as well. And that's also for a public-facing instance. But again, we're not going to do that here. Skip domain validation. Basically, we are going to be using this because we're using an internal domain. Nextcloud can't actually do its standard test where it kind of goes out to the internet and then comes back in and then finds out exactly where our domain is. So because we're using an internal only domain, we're going to hit this up as true. The Apache port is basically where Nextcloud serves its web traffic, its website information. It has its own Apache system in place that defaults to port 11,000. It's important to make sure that that's there, and also the Apache IP binding is set to all sources, all incoming networks. Now, I have changed a few other things in here. These are kind of for my own use case. I've increased the memory limit for PHP, and I actually changed the Nextcloud talk port from 3478 to 3479. So that's back. In fact, we can actually just comment the Nextcloud talk port out, which will be done when you copy and paste this. So that's fine. Yes, that's good. Upload limit I've set to 20 gigs. So yeah, we might need to do a few configurations in Nginx Proxy Manager for this, but I'll show you that part in a second. So yeah, so essentially what we've done here is we're on port 8383, skip domain validation true because we're using an internal domain, Apache port 11,000, Apache IP binding 0000, and there we go, a couple of things there. So with that done, we're going to hit deploy. This is now going to pull the master container onto the mini mainframe. So to enter the setup, all we've got to do here is wait for the bottom to say ready to handle connections, which it is. And then you can either go open a new tab, do the IP in port 8383, or you can just in Dockge click 8383 here, and it will open this for us. You might get the connection is not private prompt. If you do, don't worry about it. Oh, by the way, if you do that in Dockge, just be careful. It might have already set its host name. The host name we actually want to do is 192.168.1. 624. Yours can be whatever you want to get. You could do an auto get if you wanted. Simply because otherwise it'll open it in a random place. So it might be worth doing that. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, so if you get the prompt at what I just got, just come up here and do HTTP. And all we got to do is HTTPS because it has a self-signed certificate. So where it says bad request, don't worry about it. Just change it to HTTPS, your system's IP address, and the port we set in the compose file, which was 8383. Alrighty, that's fine. Click advance and then proceed. And that gets us to where we're going. Now, do not skip this page, whatever you do. We want to grab this passphrase at the bottom. This is a randomly generated passphrase from Nextcloud all-in-one. This will allow us access to the administration page in the future. You save that in your password manager. I'm going to save that in my Vault Warden. I've got a video for this in the description below if you're after it. So I'm going to do Nextcloud all-in-one test environment admin password. There's no username for that, so we're just going to paste that in there. And yeah, double check that's in, and there you go. That's great. And we'll save. Once we're done with that, we can click open all-in-one and pop our passcode in. Pop the passcode in and click login. Now, on some versions of this, it will just keep spinning around endlessly now. And I have no idea why that happens. It might be some sort of setup in my network. It could just be something with the image. But every time I've gone to set up Nextcloud all-in-one, at this point, it always continuously spins. The only way to get around it is to literally hit F5 on your keyboard and force refresh the page, and then just paste the password back in and log in. And then miraculously, it works. Now we're at the point here where we've got Nextcloud all-in-one 951. It's got a lot of documentation links here if you're interested in that. Now just remember something important, because in the compose file we set domain validation skip the check to true. Whatever you put in here and submit, it's going to accept straight away, even if you've set it up incorrectly. Normally, Nextcloud would test the domain that you're putting in. But because we've skipped that because we're using a local domain, it won't do the test. So if things don't work after this point, that's literally because you haven't set it up correctly in Nginx Proxy Manager, which we're about to do, or some other variant. So what we're going to do now is go to Nginx Proxy Manager, and we're going to add a new proxy. We're going to put in Nextcloud. You do whatever you want. .kltech services. .dynu.net, because as we know, our custom DNS is going to reroute this back into the system. IP address 192.168.6.24. That's the mini mainframe. And then we're going to do port 11,000. Remember the Apache port we specified in the compose file. Block common exploits, WebSocket support. The other thing that we need to do here is also put a little bit of a configuration file in. So first of all, if we go to SSL and we do certificates, KLTech services, force, we'll also do internal only. That puts us on our special internal list. We've selected this SSL certificate. When we go to advanced, we're just going to paste this little bit of configuration in, which is recommended by Nextcloud all-in-one. So that's that. And again, all this will be linked in the description below for you. When we're happy with that, I'm going to double check the spelling. Nextcloud.kltechservices.dynu.net. That looks good to me. So we're going to click save. Okay, so we've created our Nextcloud internal domain. That looks good to go. Okay, and don't forget, we also need to put in a firewall rule. So sudo uncomplicated firewall allow 11,000. So if we do sudo uncomplicated firewall status numbered 11,000, obviously that lets our reverse proxy in. There are no port forwards on the router itself, so we should now be able to jump over here. We should now be able to put this in nextcloud.kltech services. Watch out for spellings. You've got to be really careful by here now. .dynu.net. So let's go back through. Nextcloud.kl tech services.dynu.net. Really, really important, that is. Again, that's just going to go through no matter what. Now, we are going to check the box that installs Nextcloud 30. But before we do that, we're just going to come down here and check a few boxes in here. Do we want antivirus? Yes, we do. All these require about a gig extra RAM. Full text search? Yes. Nextcloud traffic? Talk? Yes. Docker socket? Yes. Save changes. We're also going to go down here to time zones, and we're going to set Europe, London, because that's where I am. Well, I'm in Wales, but that's the time zone. So that's all there. We're going to check the boxes in Nextcloud 30. I'm going to click download and start containers. So what this is doing now in the background is it is pulling all these containers down. And if we go over here to our terminal, we can do sudo docker ps. And we'll start seeing containers pop up in a few seconds. So right now we've got the Nextcloud all-in-one. That's the master container. Click up arrow and enter. And we can see Collabora is now on here. As you can see, it is starting to pull these containers down and installing them. And if we keep going, look, Nextcloud Talk, Nextcloud Postgres. And it's going to, I can't remember, I think it's between 10 and 15 containers. And we can see the various port numbers being used. So we've got port 3478 for the talk. That is something you're going to need to put through your router firewall if you want it to work as well, by the way. And don't forget, you're going to need to add an uncomplicated firewall rule as well if you're running that on your system. Because 3478 is going to be like your version of Skype, for example, or WhatsApp. That's Nextcloud Talk. Anything else? Yeah, ClamAV, full text search has now been added, and Redis. And again, you can just keep running this. So this is sudo docker ps, and that just shows us all the containers on the system. By constantly refreshing like this, we can see what is Nextcloud All-in-One Talk at the top there recording. Fine. And obviously we can scroll up imaginary, the Docker socket proxy, and it's about done. I've got a really fast fiber connection here, so this is really cool. I've got a 5900X CPU Ryzen 9 in here, so things do work a little bit faster. But ultimately, it should be around about 3 or 4 minutes getting everything in. When it's done, it'll automatically refresh itself as it has here. And it is now starting all those containers, as you can see. So this will refresh itself. And I think after a little while, if it gets to the point where nothing's kind of working, it'll give us a button to click manually refresh. But yeah, if we look down here, so yes, it's just, things are still starting. You can actually click on these different things, the word starting next to the yellow. And if we do, it'll give us, so it says waiting for Nextcloud to start. So if we click out of this and we go to Nextcloud, you can see that it is actually running through the logs here now. See, verifying integrity, that's what it's doing at the moment. So it shouldn't be too long, and then this should all be up and running. And there's now the reload button here. Look, it's kind of got fed up of checking for us. So it's going to basically make us do it. So if we click reload, we're just waiting again. So again, Apache, as you can see, is waiting for Nextcloud to start. And if we click on Nextcloud starting, you kind of, there you go, tasks enabled. You can see it's running through the mill. F5, calendar contacts, F5. It's just doing its thing. So we just need to give it a few minutes. You could just literally wait on this screen, and every minute or two, just click reload, and hopefully we'll start seeing things go green. If these things are not starting, or you're getting errors like slim error and things like that, it's highly likely to be because one of the containers couldn't start because you already have a container on your system that has the port it needs to be running on, is using on here. So if we go back to the terminal and we do sudo docker ps, If we do another reload, and we're all green. Beautiful. Nextcloud is now officially running. Nextcloud version 30. This is the version number for the all-in-one project. But Nextcloud as a whole, we are running version 30 of. Next thing to write down is going to be your admin username and password. So admin's username is admin. The password is randomly generated here for this. I'm going to save this in my Nextcloud all-in-one. So if I do Nextcloud all-in-one test admin password. Username is going to be admin. Password is what I've just copied and pasted. Save. So that's all on there now. So we should be able to click open your Nextcloud instance, which is going to go to the link in the bottom left there, https nextcloud.kltechservices.dynu.net. And it's working. Boom. First time. Even with the domain skip validation, I was thinking, oh, is this going to give us a bit of iffy? But we checked spellings. We kept good thing. And again, by the way, just to emphasize this again, we do not have port 443 open on the router. This is running internally. And many people out there might be saying, why do you want to do that? Well, if you want to run this over like WireGuard or a Tailscale or a VPN or something like that, you don't ever have to expose your Nextcloud service instance to the world. So yeah, really happy to say that we've got that running internally. Now, if we log in for the first time, there we go, that worked. This is our test environment for Nextcloud all-in-one. So yeah, let's get rid of that. That's Nextcloud installed. So if we go back to the terminal and we do our sudo docker ps, we've got Dockge installed, Nginx Proxy Manager installed, and Nextcloud installed, which is great. That's the internal side of things taken care of. But what if we do want to expose this to the World Wide Web? Well, you've got a couple options, right? You can either at this point forward port 443 and remove the custom DNS option, which would allow effectively that traffic to come in. If you don't have a static IP address and you're connecting with a dynamic IP address, that's no problem either. We can actually get that to work very well with DYNU. To get that to work, we'll go back to DYNU and log in. So to get our mini mainframe server, our home lab server, to update the IPv4 address or IPv6 address, wherever you're after in here, to our domain online, we need obviously to send our public IP address to DYNU on a regular polling time schedule. Can't think of a better word for that. To set that up automatically and get the update IP update history on working there, we're gonna do this. So we're gonna clear the screen. The DDClient installed. The DDClient is going to be running with sudo apt install DDClient, kind of setup wizard to go through. And essentially, we're just going to blank through it because we have a custom configuration that I'm going to apply at the end. So we're going to do 9 other. We're going to do 31 other. We're going to say 31 other. Blank username, blank password, blank, 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 blank. We'll do web discovery, number 1. Host to update, blank. And that just creates all that for us. It says file is invalid, but that is the file that we want, etcddclient.conf. If we do sudo nano, and if you're having trouble getting nano up, you can just do sudo apt install nano. etcddclient.conf. Yeah. And essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to delete everything. And I will leave this information in the link in the description below. And that'll be under the DDClient configuration file information. We're going to paste this in. And we're going to edit some things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do kltechservices.dynu.net. The password and username is going to remain the same, although I will obviously block that out so you guys can't see that. And that's pretty much the only change that I have to make here because I'm using the DYNU service. If you're using it, you might want to go through the configuration setup wizard, or you might want to try and set this up. But again, I can't really account for all the different variables out there. So when we've done that, then we'll do Control and O to write out the file. And then Control and X to close that down. Now I'm just going to run the status command. Just run this. Local time is 1808. It's actually 1908, so we're an hour out here. I just want to update my system time a second because it's an hour out, and that's probably because it's not accounting for daylight savings in the United Kingdom. So sudo time date CTL set time zone Europe London. Let's have a look now. There we go. Yeah, up here was 1808, but now it's 1909 BST, British Standard Time. That's better. The other thing I'm going to want to run here is to restart DDClient. We've amended the configuration. Now let's check the status now. So that looks good to me. Also going to want to do sudo systemctl enable DDClient. Just make sure it starts on boot. And at this point, what should have happened is if we refresh this page, we're now getting the public IP address of the server, which is exactly what we wanted. So that shows us that this is working perfectly fine. At this point, we can now open the port on the router 443 to this system on the network. And what we do need to do at this point is now take away the custom DNS option. So it actually now starts going to the web for it, in effect opening this up and exposing it. So if I go to services and I go to custom DNS rules, this will be a little bit different on your system to mine. And I'm just going to delete that rule. Now that might take a few minutes to take effect to clear the DNS cache. While we're here, I'm also going to do a DNS lookup. And we're going to change this from Dockge to Nextcloud. And we should now get an IP address. Oh, hasn't updated quite yet. There we go. Took a few minutes there, a few seconds. We now have a public IP address connected up there. Which means we should now be able to go to our Nextcloud dashboard. If we refresh, we should now be looking at the exposed version of the page per se. There we go. That's now exposed to the World Wide Web. Now we can also run an NS lookup command in here. Oh, there you go. Just needed a few minutes. It just needed a few minutes to synchronize that. Yeah, there you go. Nextcloud .kltechservices.dynu.net is now linked up and synchronized, which is great. So we are exposed. But when we're exposing our services, and you can use the methods I've taught you here today to expose all your services, but remember, not all services need to be exposed. You need to ask yourself, am I the only one going to be using the service? If the answer to that question is yes, then you don't need to expose this anyway. That said, platforms like Nextcloud are, by design, supposed to be shared, because, you know, it's a cloud server. You might want to share that with friends and family, or send links and files to different people. And if you want to do that, then that's fine. But you also want to mitigate attacks. And using Nginx Proxy Manager, there is a really cool additional application that we can install. You can either install this as a Docker container or straight onto your server, which I'm going to be doing. And that service is Fail2ban. And what that's going to do is it's going to check our Nginx Proxy Manager logs. and it's going to kind of determine if anyone's trying to brute force their way into our services. Now, some services like Nextcloud also have brute force detection options in here as well. So if I go to, before we install Fail2ban, if I go to apps, and if we go to featured apps and scroll down, and we look for brute force, look at brute force is not there, so we click the little thing here and do brute. There you go, brute force settings. Oh, it's already enabled by default on here. Okay, it's fine. Not always it is. We do administration settings in that case. And on the left, we go from personal, scroll down to security under administration. You've got the brute force whitelist here. Now it says your remote IP address was identified as 192.168.6.29 and is not actively throttled at the moment, which is great. Ideally, we shouldn't put anything in the whitelist here because you want all traffic to be treated the same, really. So that's fine. It's already identifying us in that capacity. So brute force is enabled here, in which case we can kind of just skip this and go straight to our Fail2ban setup. So if I open the mini mainframe here, so sudo apt update -yes, and then upgrade. And we didn't need to do it. Obviously, it's saying that nothing's been updated there, so that's fine. So the next step is to install Fail2ban, which essentially will stop bad actors from repeatedly attempting to brute force into our Nextcloud server, all our exposed services via Nginx Proxy Manager, because we're going to pair Nginx Proxy Manager up with Fail2ban. And essentially, it will then create an IP table rule, which will outright just reject and drop connections for anyone that's doing things on the server they shouldn't be, hitting 4.0 errors like 404s and 403s and things like that, and overall just increase our defense. And that's part of this episode, and it's the last part of this episode today as well. So thanks for staying this long in the video, and I really hope you've enjoyed it and it's been going well. So essentially, what we need to do here is install Fail2ban. To do that, we're going to run sudo apt get install Fail2ban. Yes. Awesome. We'll clear that. The next command we're going to run is basically to create copies of two very important files that Fail2ban hold. The first one is the main configuration file of Fail2ban, which is the fail2ban.conf file. We're going to create a copy but call it fail2ban.local because Fail2ban highly recommend not overriding the original file. And the second one is the jail.conf file. Again, we don't want to override the default jail.conf, so we're going to create a jail.local. So if you notice, we're going from confs to locals. So that's done. What we need to do now, basically, is create a jail for our Nginx proxy manager in Fail2ban. So we're basically a black pit that anyone coming onto the server and hitting the server with these different errors or attempting to log in with wrong passwords and things like that, Nginx Proxy Manager can pick up and Fail2ban will actually take actions against. So we're going to, first of all, go into the file that we just created, the jail file. So we're going to do sudo nano etc fail2ban jail.local. And there's going to be a lot of stuff in here that we're just not going to use. Now, you can actually leave all this in here if you want to, but it can sometimes cause a bit of havoc with the existing setup. So what I'm going to do is on the keyboard, I'm going to do Control, Shift, and number 6. Sets the mark at the bottom. I'm going to scroll up the page. Right to the top. And as this is the .local file, we have no worry about deleting anything, because we've got the .conf version of it if we need to get it back up. And then just do Control and K, which will cut everything out of the file. I suppose essentially we could have just done sudo nano jail.local if I wanted to shorten that for myself, because I think that was a bit of extra work for nothing. But I was following the main rules, I suppose, the main setup guides. And what we're going to want to do in here is put our Nginx proxy manager jail configuration in. Now, I will put all the links in the description below for you. I need to take these extra forward slashes out. And essentially, this is the jail, the configuration. So enabled true. The filter will create in a second. That'll be the Nginx proxy manager filter. The log path, this is where on your server, your home lab, where the Nginx proxy manager logs are. Now, if you're following along with me, we can easily get that by going into Dockge, Nginx proxy manager, and in the compose file, you'll see where we've got the first volume there, the first binding, home, kltech, docker, npm, and data. So we can copy that, go back to the terminal. We can delete everything up to where it says logs, /logs, and we'll just paste this in. And essentially now the log path where Fail2ban are going to search Nginx proxy manager's logs is located at /home, kltech, docker, where I put my project files, Nginx proxy manager npm, and then data logs. It's got a little bit of a formula in that log path, which basically means it's going to look for any of the logs, no matter what numbers on them. It's got a bit of a wildcard there with the asterisk in case there's any text on there, and then underscore access.log, because that's kind of the format that Nginx proxy manager runs with. Ports, HTTP and HTTPS, yeah, we'll leave it like that. Max retry, this is personal, this comes down to your personal preferences. Personally, I wouldn't have it less than 5. This is only because people can go on your server and click links or things like that come up with errors, and sometimes Fail2ban can do false positives. And when an error comes up for a user on your website, whether that's Nextcloud or anything else you're hosting, it can sometimes think that they're trying to log in or do something they shouldn't be doing just because an error popped up. Most people are not going to continuously hit repeat on those errors. They're going to try and seek a resolution otherwise. But again, I wouldn't have it less than 5 myself, and that gives them a good 5 attempts at whatever they're doing, including logins, before they're actually banned. The ban time is 3,600 seconds. It's always in seconds. That translates to 1 hour. You can amend that however much you want, but I think that's perfectly suitable. The ban action is going to drop their IP address into the IP tables, the back end of your firewall on your Linux machine. And if you've been following along with this video, you should have the Uncomplicated Firewall installed. IP tables will be installed in the back end. And then the find time. And the find time essentially is basically how far back in time should Fail2ban look to see how many times this person has been attempting these errors or logins. I've got that set to 86,400 seconds, which is 24 hours. So look back in the last 24 hours. If this IP address has had 5 attempts at trying to log in and got it wrong, or they've done something on the server where they got it wrong 5 times in 24 hours, ban them for that 1 hour. As simple as that. Chain, as I showed you earlier in the video, you've had your Docker IP, not Docker IP tables, your IP tables. But in there, you saw the chain I was showing you where it said Docker user, where our Docker punches connections through on the firewall. Well, by using the chain equals Docker user, we can actually just make sure that Nginx proxy manager as a Docker container is the one being analyzed in the IP tables, so it can actually block the IP addresses. And it needs to be set that way, otherwise it won't work. Ignore IPs. So this is basically something you should definitely do. You should either put IP addresses in, like I have here, the loopback address for the system we're on, 127.0.0.1, or IP ranges. So this is my WireGuard IP range. So if anyone on my VPN that I authorize to come through they can have unlimited attempts. Basically, it won't ban them no matter what they do. Same for my VLAN 6, which has all my personal devices on in my house. If I type a password in wrong, no matter how many times I do it, it's not going to ban me. And again, for my primary LAN on the servers, again, it won't ban me. When I'm happy with that, I'm just going to hit Control and O, enter, that writes the file. Then we can do Control and X to get out of it. What we need to do at this point now is create the filter. So we're going to create a file called sudo nano etc fail2ban in the filter.d directory /nginx proxy manager.conf. In this, we're going to have something called a regex. Now, this is not going to be on yours by default. I am going to have it in the link in the description below for you to copy and paste. All this is that it's teaching Fail2ban how to read Nginx proxy manager format in the logs. And it needs to know that so it can actively scan those logs correctly and look for the 404 or 30 errors, things like that. Find the client IP addresses and things like that. So that's why it's there. It is a must if you want to do that, and that's all it's really doing. It's just scanning and it's telling it the format of how to scan the logs. Again, Control O, write out, Control X, and that's in there. Now we've amended those things, we are going to need to restart the Fail2ban service. To do that, we can just do sudo systemctl restart Fail2ban. The next thing I want to do is check the status of it to make sure it's come back online. So sudo systemctl status Fail2ban. It's online, it's active, it's working, the server is ready. And to make sure the jail is online and working correctly, I'm going to chuck in here sudo Fail2ban client status nginx proxy manager. And because it's got these little zeros in here, it's actually telling us that currently nothing has hit this, nothing has gone wrong. But we're gonna provoke the bear. We're gonna poke the bear here and make this work. So as you're aware, we can get onto our server here because it's now exposed to the internet. It is coming through. What I'm going to do here is show first of all that we can log in. This just shows you that I can log in perfectly fine. Go. Now I'm going to show you if we go to my NordVPN and quickly connect. We're going to have an IP address of now 194.35.122.121 to pretend that we're not part of this network and we're outside it. I'm going to try and log in with the admin account, but this time we're going to try and brute force it. We're going to put a random password in. So that's attempt 1. Attempt 2. Attempt 3. Attempt 4. And this is attempt 5. And as you can see, we're now unable to connect. It's completely blocked us up. And if you see here, the IP address is matching. So it's got a successful ban in place against the IP address after its 5th attempt coming in. 194.35.122.121. And that's Fail2ban banning as well. And again, if we try and refresh the page, we'll see that it's just dropping the connection. It won't come through at all now. We've triggered the brute force attack module on Nextcloud, and Fail2ban is concurrently also run that way as well. So multiple defense systems working in tandem there together, but especially our Fail2ban as well. And that's how you set Fail2ban up. So I hope the video's been of great help to you in setting up Nginx Proxy Manager, Dockge, Fail2ban. And this has been the second episode in the Homelab miniseries, the Ultimate Homelab. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next episode, which will either be the next week or the week after. Whenever I get 5 seconds to myself to put one together. And we'll continue on our journey of the Ultimate Homelab. Thank you very much for watching.